I remember it vividly. The race began like any other, the engines roaring to life, vibrations shaking the very air around me. But something was different this time. The usual hum of anticipation that buzzed in my ears was replaced by an eerie silence. The crowd, unseen but felt, seemed to hold its breath. My heart raced, each beat syncopated with the ticking of the countdown clock. I gripped the steering wheel, fingers trembling. The crystal that powered my machine shimmered faintly, a deep glow pulsing beneath my fingertips. It was the only thing that mattered now. The first corner came up faster than expected. The path twisted and bent in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The moment my car veered into the turn, the world around me bent as though it was made of rubber. Every curve distorted space, and time seemed to stop. I felt a rush of vertigo, the sense that I wasn't in control. My thoughts slowed. This wasn't like any other race I had been in. I had no idea what was happening, only that the track ahead seemed to warp and stretch beyond what was possible. I tried to regain control, but the road continued to bend in impossible ways. I glanced to my side and saw the other racers. No, they weren't racers anymore. They looked more like shadows, figures flickering in and out of existence, barely tangible. The world itself seemed to tear at the seams. Each racer around me, even the ones I had known for years, became nothing more than silhouettes against a backdrop of broken space. But there was something in their movements, something wrong, as if they weren't entirely real. I couldn't understand it. My machine shuddered as it passed through a distortion in the air. A shockwave rippled through the vehicle, rattling my body in the harness. The power core glowed brighter, its pulse steady, even though I knew something was wrong. I looked out ahead, the track now a mess of angles that didn't line up, walls stretching upwards before collapsing in on themselves. A voice in the back of my mind whispered a warning. You must keep moving forward, but how? The race didn't make sense anymore. The ground beneath me didn't feel solid. My eyes darted to the display screen, but it was no help. The usual readout speed, energy levels, navigation were all scrambled. There was only one thing that seemed stable, the crystal at the center of the machine. It thrummed with power, and I felt a strange pull towards it, an instinct telling me that my survival depended on staying close to it. I gripped the wheel tighter, eyes fixed on the glowing crystal. The racers around me had disappeared. Only the track, now an endless loop of bending space, remained. A loud crash echoed behind me. I turned instinctively, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Not a trace of the other racers, no sign of any crash. Just emptiness. I felt like I was in the void of space, floating in some kind of eternal nothingness. But the hum of the crystal kept me tethered to reality, or whatever this was. I pressed forward, even though I had no idea where I was going. The road beneath me twisted again, the walls of the city now towering and flickering like broken images in a shattered mirror. I focused on the crystal again. Its light seemed to intensify, like it was drawing energy from the very air itself. My machine surged forward, faster than before, and the track seemed to keep up, bending and twisting to accommodate me. It was as though I was moving in a loop, a never-ending spiral into the unknown. I felt like I was racing through time itself. Every second was both an eternity and a fleeting instant. The crystal's energy was doing something to me, making my senses sharper, clearer. But it was also taking its toll. Sweat ran down my face as I fought to keep my grip steady. My body felt light, like it was no longer fully connected to the machine. The distortion of space around me grew stronger. I could see flashes of other racers in the distance, or what I thought were racers. They were just faint outlines now, their forms glitching in and out of existence. I couldn't tell if they were ahead or behind me, if they even existed at all. The only thing I could focus on was the crystal, its glow now blinding. I could feel the pulse of the crystal syncing with my heartbeat, an unsettling rhythm. As I pressed on, the world around me began to shift in ways I couldn't explain. The cityscape, once familiar, became a blur of impossible structures, floating platforms, and spiraling towers that defied physics. It was like racing through a dream, and yet everything felt so real. Every bump in the road, every shift in gravity, seemed to push me closer to some unknown destination. I wasn't sure if I was moving forward or falling deeper into this distorted reality. Suddenly, there was a flash of light. It was so bright that for a moment, I thought it had consumed everything. My eyes burned as I tried to keep my focus, the racing machine rattling with energy. The crystal was vibrating now, and I felt it pulling me toward something, urging me to push harder. I fought against the intense gravity, the bending space, everything. I had no choice. I had to reach the source of power, the last remaining crystal that fueled the city. If I failed, everything would be lost. The track began to straighten, but not in a way that I expected. Instead of a smooth path, it became an endless corridor of broken roads, shards of time, and fragmented reality. I could see echoes of the racers I had once known, but their faces were all blurred, their features distorted. They were shadows now, drifting further away with every turn I took. But there was one figure in particular that caught my attention, a figure I couldn't recognize, but who seemed to be watching me. It didn't move, only stared. I could feel the weight of its gaze, even as I sped past. My breath hitched. Who was it? Why was I so drawn to this figure, this shadow in the distance? There was something haunting about it, like it knew the outcome of this race, like it was somehow connected to my fate. I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure was trying to tell me something, to warn me. But I had no time to stop and think. The race was still happening, the crystal still pulsing with energy, urging me onward. I forced myself to focus again, pushing forward faster, through the disorienting maze of space and time. The track began to pulse with its own rhythm, like it was alive, reacting to my every movement. It was like the entire city had become a sentient being, aware of my presence, aware of the power I carried with me. The shadows in the corners of my vision grew stronger, more distinct, but I ignored them. I couldn't afford distractions. The race was all that mattered. The fate of the city depended on it. The world around me seemed to tear open, like a veil had been lifted. I could see the source of power now, a massive crystal at the end of the track, glowing brighter than anything I had ever seen. It was the heart of the city, the last remaining source of energy. But it was guarded, protected by something I couldn't understand. The air around it crackled with power, and I could feel the pull in my chest, the call of the crystal. But the closer I got, the more distorted everything became. My hands shook, my pulse quickening as I neared the source. I could see the distortion in the air, the warping of reality itself, and the crystal's light seemed to fracture the world around me. It was as though the city was collapsing, breaking apart at the seams. I had to reach it. I had to claim it. But the closer I got, the harder it became to maintain control. My car wavered, the machine groaning under the strain. The very fabric of space seemed to resist me, pulling at me, trying to stop me. And then everything stopped. The light from the crystal blazed like a star, engulfing everything around me. I felt weightless, suspended in time. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. But in that moment of stillness, I realized something: the race, the crystal, the city, none of it was real. I was trapped in a dream, a lucid nightmare. But it was too late. The final echo of the race lingered in my mind. A single thought: I had won, but at what cost? I don't know when it started, but everything shifted. The city, the track, The racers, all of it dissolved into a haze of impossible shapes. It was as if the very foundation of reality had cracked open, spilling out fragments of past and future. My hands trembled on the wheel, the crystal now a pulsating beacon of light, its glow casting strange shadows that danced across the warped streets. There were no straight lines anymore, no stable reference points. I was floating through a world that was not mine, a world twisted beyond comprehension. The car's engine sputtered, a loud mechanical growl, as though it was struggling to keep up with the unraveling space around it. My heart beat faster, matching the erratic rhythm of the machine. I tried to focus, but it felt impossible. The track beneath me was alive, shifting and reshaping itself, as though it was rewriting the rules of physics. I could see distorted figures standing on the sidelines, but they were not real people. They were shadows, echoes from another time, observers from a dimension that no longer existed. One of the figures stepped forward. It was a man, or at least what looked like a man. His face was covered in darkness, his features blurred and shifting, never settling into a clear form. But I could feel his presence, like a weight pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I couldn't look away. He didn't speak, but I could hear his voice, cold and hollow, echoing in my mind. "You think you control it, but you are just a spectator in this game," he said, and the words froze my blood. His voice was familiar, but I couldn't place it. A memory lingered at the edge of my consciousness, a feeling I couldn't shake. I pressed the pedal down harder, pushing the machine faster, desperate to escape the pull of his gaze. But the world around me refused to let go. The road ahead bent like a snake, curling into loops and spirals, leading me deeper into a maze I couldn't escape. Every turn was a test of my resolve. I couldn't give in. I had to win. The survival of the city depended on it. The distortion intensified. I could hear the hum of the crystal growing louder, vibrating through the air like a song only it could understand. But the song wasn't soothing. It was a warning. A low guttural sound, like the rumble of thunder before a storm. I looked down at the crystal, its glow blinding, but I couldn't stop staring. It had become more than just a power source. It was calling to me, urging me to push forward. But why? What was it trying to tell me? What was it trying to do to me? A flash of light in my peripheral vision pulled me back to the track. I swerved, narrowly avoiding a collapsing bridge that had appeared out of nowhere. The road was changing faster now, breaking apart in front of me, disappearing into nothingness. I could feel the weight of the distortion pressing in from all sides, bending the very air I breathed. I fought to keep my focus, but it was like trying to hold onto water. Everything kept slipping away. I could see glimpses of familiar faces, old friends, loved ones, but they were gone the moment I tried to reach out. I was no longer sure what was real. The racers, the track, even the machines, everything seemed to be warping, flickering in and out of existence. Was I still racing, or had I entered a different reality entirely? The shadows grew longer, stretching across the track like fingers reaching for me. I knew I had to keep moving. There was no other choice. But as I pressed forward, the road began to narrow, closing in on itself. I could see the end of the track now, but it was an illusion, a mirage that was pulling me into its depths. I pushed the machine harder, but the harder I tried, the more the road seemed to fight back. It was like the entire city was alive, trying to devour me. I could feel the pulse of the crystal, still at the center of my machine, but its power was becoming unpredictable, erratic. It wasn't just fueling my speed now, it was feeding the very distortions around me. I tried to hold on to control, but the forces at play were too strong. The track twisted again, looping around in impossible circles, and I had no idea if I was moving forward or just spiraling into oblivion. The shadows were closer now, their forms solidifying into shapes I recognized. But they weren't real. They couldn't be. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the chaos. Were these the other racers? Were they still out there? Had they been consumed by the distortions? I couldn't be sure. I heard a voice again, soft and almost pleading, echoing in my mind. It was a voice I knew well. "Don't do it," it whispered. "This is not your path." I looked around, but there was no one there. Only shadows and endless, shifting space. I accelerated again, my thoughts a blur. The distortion was too much to bear, but I couldn't stop. The crystal was my only hope. It was the key to saving my community, to saving the city that depended on this power. I had to win, even if I didn't understand the cost. The track stretched ahead, a shimmering line that disappeared into the horizon. But something was wrong. The line wasn't just disappearing, it was collapsing, folding into itself, as though time itself was unraveling. I felt my stomach churn as the world twisted around me. The figure from earlier appeared again, standing in the middle of the road. He was no longer just a shadow. He had solidified into something more tangible, more menacing. His face was clearer now, but it was a face I didn't recognize, not entirely. His eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and as he stepped forward, the very air around him seemed to distort, like the fabric of space was warping under his influence. "You cannot control what is already lost," he said, his voice cold and distant, like a distant memory of a nightmare. His words echoed in my mind, lingering like a poison. I could feel the weight of them, pressing down on my chest. The track ahead was no longer just a race, it had become a test, a trial that I wasn't sure I was prepared for. I had always thought I was in control, that I could win, but now I wasn't so sure. The world around me was a blur of motion and noise, and I was starting to lose myself in it. What if I wasn't supposed to win? What if the race was never about power at all? I couldn't stop, though. I had no choice. The city needed me. The people I loved needed me. And if I failed, if I lost this race, everything would be destroyed. The pressure mounted like a weight on my chest. The track ahead was narrowing again, and I could see the end in sight, but I knew that it was not what I thought it was. It was a false ending, a trap that would consume me if I wasn't careful. But it didn't matter. I was already too far in. The crystal's pull was irresistible. My machine surged forward, the engine roaring with a new intensity. The road ahead seemed to stretch into infinity, but I could feel the presence of the figure, watching me. The world around me was a swirling mess of light and shadow, and I knew that every choice I made now would shape the future. But what future? Which future? I didn't know anymore. The race, the crystal, the power, it was all becoming too much. I was slipping further into the distortion, losing my grip on what was real. And then I saw it. A single moment of clarity, a break in the chaos. The crystal, glowing brighter than ever, was no longer just a power source, it was the key to everything. It was the only thing that could save me from the unraveling reality. But as I reached for it, I realized something. It wasn't just a race to control the crystal. It was a race to control the very fabric of existence itself. And I wasn't the only one vying for that control. The shadows were closing in. They were waiting for me to make my move. In that moment, I understood. The race was never just about the crystal. It was about what we were willing to sacrifice to hold on to it. What would I sacrifice? What was I willing to lose? The answer was simple: everything. The track, the shadows, the distortion, it was all leading to one final confrontation. And I knew that I had to make my move now. There was no turning back the moment I made my decision. Everything around me seemed to break apart. The machine roared beneath me. its engine vibrating with a power I couldn't control, yet I still felt connected to it. The track twisted into a spiral, a vortex of light and shadow, leading to a single point. The crystal at the center of the track was no longer just a glowing object. It had become the focal point of all the distortions, the anchor in this chaotic world. It was the source of the destruction, but it was also the only way out. The shadows were everywhere now, filling the space between the warped structures of the city. They moved faster, more aggressively, as though they were closing in, ready to engulf me. I couldn't see their faces anymore, but I could feel their presence. They were the lost racers, the ones who had come before me, consumed by the power of the crystal. They were warning me, trying to tell me something, but I couldn't hear them, couldn't understand their silent screams. All I could do was focus on the crystal, the pulse of its energy. The figure from earlier appeared again, standing at the edge of the track. He wasn't just a shadow anymore. He was solid, his features clear and distinct, but his face still wasn't mine. His eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "You've made your choice," he said, his voice like the crackling of ice. "But you do not understand what you are about to unleash." I didn't respond. What choice did I have? The city, my people, they were all depending on me. There was no turning back now. The closer I got to the crystal, the stronger the pull became. It was like a magnetic force, drawing me in, urging me to reach for it. My hands were shaking, my vision blurred by the intensity of its light. The crystal's energy was growing stronger, vibrating with a frequency I could almost feel in my bones. It was changing me, altering my perception of reality. The world around me was collapsing, becoming unstable. The road ahead was nothing but a swirling vortex, and I knew that if I didn't act fast, I would be consumed by it. As I reached out for the crystal, I felt a sudden resistance. The shadows were moving faster now, swirling around me, trying to pull me away. I gripped the steering wheel harder, my fingers digging into the cold metal. The air was thick with tension, crackling with energy. I could feel the crystal's power fighting back against me, its energy overwhelming. I tried to push forward, but it felt like I was moving through thick tar, each second stretching into an eternity. The road beneath me buckled, the city itself shaking under the strain. I had only one choice left: go through it. The thought hit me like a jolt of electricity, and I knew there was no other option. I had to break through the barrier that the crystal had created, even if it meant losing myself in the process. I took a deep breath and pushed the machine forward, forcing it into the heart of the distortion. The world around me exploded into light, and for a moment, everything went silent. The crystal's pulse was deafening, and I felt my body lift off the seat, weightless, as though I was no longer bound to this reality. I was floating in a void now, suspended in a realm where time and space no longer existed. The shadows were gone, replaced by an endless sea of light, swirling in patterns I couldn't comprehend. The crystal hovered in front of me, its energy radiating outward, rippling through the space around me. I reached for it again, my fingers grazing its surface. The moment I touched it, a shockwave of energy coursed through my body, and I felt every cell in my body explode with power. The world around me shattered. The sound was deafening. A violent roar, like the clash of 1,000 storms, filled my ears. I was no longer in the machine. I was no longer even in the city. I was in the heart of the crystal, at the center of its energy, and I could feel its consciousness, its will inside my mind. It wasn't just a power source. It was alive. It was sentient. It was controlling everything: the race, the distortions, the very fabric of reality. I understood now. The crystal wasn't just a tool to save the city. It was the source of its destruction. "You cannot control me," the voice of the crystal echoed in my mind, its tone deep and ancient. You are a fleeting moment in time, a shadow that will soon fade. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. How could I possibly fight something so powerful? How could I control something that had controlled me all along? But even as the voice spoke, I could feel my connection to it weakening. My grip on the crystal was loosening, and the world around me began to dissolve, fading into the void. But then I remembered something. The city. The people I had sworn to protect. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I wasn't just trying to win a race. I was trying to save everything. I clenched my fist around the crystal, focusing on that single thought on the lives I had left behind. The energy surged within me, and the crystal's pulse began to slow. The distortions around me weakened, the world stabilizing bit by bit. It was working. I was breaking through. The crystal's voice screamed in fury, its energy flaring up in a final, desperate attempt to stop me. The light around me became blinding, its intensity nearly unbearable. I felt like I was being torn apart, my body breaking down under the strain. But I refused to let go. I refused to let it win. I pushed harder, my mind focused on the one thing that mattered: saving my city, my community, my people. I was not just a player in this game. I was the one who would rewrite the rules. The crystal's light began to dim, its power waning under my grip. The energy around me faded, and the distortions started to unravel piece by piece. I could feel the city again, feel the weight of its existence, its heart still beating beneath me. The shadows vanished, the oppressive force that had surrounded me lifting. I was still in the void, but the crystal was no longer in control. I had won. The race was over. The city was safe. But at what cost? The question lingered in my mind. As the light from the crystal faded completely, I was left standing in a vast emptiness. The city was gone. The race was gone. The people, the shadows, the distortions, all of it was gone. But I could still feel them, somewhere deep inside me, a part of me that I couldn't let go of. I had won, yes, but I had also lost something. A piece of myself had been consumed by the power of the crystal, and I wasn't sure if I could ever get it back. The void around me was silent, and I felt the weight of the emptiness pressing in. I closed my eyes, letting the silence wash over me. The crystal, now just a dull glow in my hand, had lost its power. The city, my home, was no longer just a distant memory. It had become part of me. But the cost of saving it had been higher than I ever expected. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing: the world would never be the same. And neither would I. I had broken through the distortion, but now I had to face the consequences of what I had done. Slowly, the void began to shift, and I felt the faintest pull on my body, a tug toward something I couldn't see. Was I being pulled back? Back to the race? Back to the city? Or was this just another distortion, another illusion that I had to fight? I wasn't sure. All I knew was that the journey wasn't over yet. The crystal had been just the beginning. The real race was still ahead of me, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. But there was no turning back now. As the light returned, I felt my body start to fade, my consciousness slipping away. But before everything went dark, one last thought crossed my mind. The future wasn't set in stone. The race may have ended, but the world was still waiting to be reshaped. And I, no longer just a racer, but something more, would be the one to shape it.